The radio crackled to life at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Edwards Air Force Base like a blade through silk. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves pressed the headset closer to his ear, his coffee growing cold as the transmission fought its way through layers of static and atmospheric interference. broken arrow, came the voice, distorted but unmistakably desperate. 6 souls down, coordinates follow. The words that followed would change everything. A Navy SEAL team, deep in hostile territory, their extraction bird down, enemy forces closing in like wolves on wounded prey. What happened next defied every protocol, every regulation, every assumption about who could save American lives when the chips were down. Because, in a hangar 3 miles away, a woman most people had written off was about to remind the world why they called her Ghost, and why some legends never truly retire. Reeves ran his fingers through graying hair as he stared at the coordinates flickering on his screen. The location was a nightmare. Mountainous terrain in a country where American forces weren't supposed to exist, where the nearest friendly airfield was 400 miles away, and where the weather was deteriorating by the hour. 6 Navy SEALs, America's finest, were trapped in a kill box with enemy forces converging from 3 directions. Their insertion had gone sideways when their MH-60 Black Hawk took a rocket-propelled grenade to the tail rotor, spiraling down into a valley that might as well have been on the dark side of the moon. The duty officer was already scrambling assets: 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons from the 56 Fighter Wing, a KC-135 Stratotanker for refueling, and a combat search and rescue team that would need another 45 minutes to get airborne. 45 minutes the SEALs didn't have. The enemy radio chatter intelligence was picking up told a story written in blood, a closing noose, superior numbers, and time running out like sand through an hourglass. That's when someone mentioned her name. Captain Zara, Ghost, Thorn, call sign that had once struck fear into enemy hearts from Afghanistan to Syria. Retired 2 years ago under circumstances nobody talked about, living in a trailer park 20 minutes from base, working as a flight instructor for rich kids learning to fly Cessnas. The woman who had flown more combat sorties than any pilot in her generation, who had pulled off extraction missions that made Hollywood look tame, who had been quietly erased from public records for reasons that remained classified at levels most generals couldn't access. "She won't do it," Reeves muttered, but his hand was already reaching for the secure phone. Because sometimes when everything else fails, you call a ghost. The phone rang exactly twice before a voice answered, crisp and alert despite the hour. Thorn. No pleasantries, no surprise at receiving a call from Edwards at 400. Just her name, delivered like a promise or a threat, depending on which side of the flight line you stood. Reeves could hear the faint sound of jazz music playing in the background, something melancholy and complex that seemed to match the shadows under her eyes the last time anyone had seen her at the officers' club. "Ghost, we have a situation." Reeves kept his voice steady, professional, but they both knew this wasn't a courtesy call. 6 souls down, extraction bird destroyed, hostile territory, weather window closing fast. We need someone who can thread the needle in terrain that would make a mountain goat nervous. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with unspoken history and the weight of decisions that had cost her everything once before. "How many hostiles?" Her voice carried the edge of someone who had danced with death so many times they knew its favorite songs by heart. No hesitation about the illegality of the operation, no questions about backup or support. Just the tactical question that mattered. What were the odds of bringing American boys home versus becoming another casualty statistic in a war that officially didn't exist? Unknown. Best estimate 40 to 60, light armor closing fast. Reeves heard something shift in the background, the sound of boots hitting linoleum, keys jingling, a life suddenly shifting from idle to emergency. "Ghost, we're talking about an F-22 Raptor. Mach 2.25 stealth capabilities, armed reconnaissance. You'd be going in alone, no backup, no safety net, if this goes sideways." "I'll be there in 15." The line went dead before Reeves could explain the political ramifications, the career consequences, or the fact that she hadn't flown a combat mission in 2 years. Because Zara Thorne understood something that Pentagon briefing rooms and congressional committees never quite grasped. Sometimes the only thing standing between life and death isn't politics or procedures or proper channels. Sometimes it's just one person willing to risk everything for 6 strangers, whose names they'll never know. The F-22 Raptor designated Spirit 1 sat in Hangar 7 like a sleeping predator, its angular surfaces designed to slip through radar coverage like shadows through moonlight. At 62 feet long, with a wingspan of 44 feet, the aircraft represented the pinnacle of American air superiority, stealth technology, that cost more than some countries' entire defense budgets, engines capable of supercruise without afterburner, and weapon systems that could engage threats beyond visual range with lethal precision. Zara Thorne approached the aircraft with the measured gait of someone who had learned to read danger in the way sunlight reflected off distant canopies, in the subtle change of engine harmonics, in the thousand small details that separated living pilots from memorial plaques. She wore a standard flight suit now, olive drab and unremarkable, but anyone who knew aviation could read her history in the confident way she performed her pre-flight inspection. Her hands moved across control surfaces and air intakes with the unconscious precision of a concert pianist, checking for anything that might betray her when physics and enemy fire converged at 30,000 feet. The ground crew watched with curiosity tinged by skepticism. Most had heard the stories, how Ghost had once brought a damaged A-10 Thunderbolt home on one engine and pure stubbornness, how she'd held off an entire enemy squadron long enough for a downed rescue helicopter to extract survivors, how she'd earned 3 distinguished flying crosses and a Silver Star before her 30th birthday. But stories had a way of growing in the telling, and the woman adjusting helmet and oxygen connections looked more like someone's aunt than a legendary pilot. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, 30 years of military aviation in his weathered hands, approached with the pre-flight checklist. "Ma'am, she's fueled and armed. 20mm cannon, full ammunition load, AIM-120 and AIM-9 missiles." He paused, studying her face in the hangar's fluorescent lighting. Weather's deteriorating over the target area. Visibility dropping, winds gusting to 40 knots. Mountain peaks up to 12,000 feet, and we're picking up radar signatures that suggest enemy air assets in the region. Zara nodded, her attention focused on the helmet's heads-up display system as she ran through initialization sequences. "Time to target." Her voice carried the flat affect of someone compartmentalizing fear, channeling decades of training into the narrow focus required for impossible missions. The psychological preparation was as crucial as the mechanical one, locking away doubt, personal history, and the knowledge that she was about to violate international law to save 6 men she'd never met. 97 minutes at cruise speed, Rodriguez replied. "But ma'am, if you push her to military power." He left the sentence hanging because they both understood the implications. Maximum speed meant maximum fuel consumption, reduced loiter time over the target area, and arrival at the extraction point with barely enough gas to make it home. It meant committing to a mission profile that left no room for error, no margin for extended combat, no second chances. Understood. Zara settled into the cockpit like she was coming home after a long absence. The F-22's controls felt familiar despite the 2-year gap, muscle memory, encoded in neural pathways that flight surgeons said never fully disappeared. Around her, the aircraft's systems hummed to life. Radar arrays scanning the electromagnetic spectrum, navigation computers calculating great circle routes, threat detection systems preparing to identify anything that might want to kill her in the next few hours. The tower controller's voice crackled through her headset. "Spirit 1, you are cleared for immediate departure, runway 4. Winds 50 at 15, visibility 8 miles, ceiling 3,000 broken. Contact departure control on 327.4. Good hunting, Ghost. The use of her call sign wasn't protocol, but Rodriguez had spread the word through the ground crew. Everyone understood they were witnessing something special, a legend stepping back into the arena where she had once reigned supreme. Engines spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder, twin Pratt and Whitney F119 turbofans generating 35,000 pounds of thrust each. The Raptor rolled forward with deceptive grace, its delta wings cutting through air with mathematical precision. To observers, it looked almost leisurely, until the afterburners kicked in and transformed controlled power into pure violence. The aircraft lifted off the runway like it was escaping gravity itself, climbing at an angle that defied reasonable expectations of what metal and engineering could accomplish. At 15,000 feet, Zara leveled off and activated the aircraft's stealth systems. The F-22 essentially disappeared from conventional radar, its radar cross-section reduced to roughly that of a steel marble. Below, the California desert stretched away in shades of brown and gold, peaceful and eternal, giving no hint of the life-or-death drama playing out in radio frequencies and classified satellite feeds. She was alone now in the way that only combat pilots understood, surrounded by sophisticated technology, but ultimately dependent on skills, instincts, and the kind of courage that couldn't be programmed into computer systems. The mission parameters scrolled across her heads-up display like a recipe for disaster. Penetrate hostile airspace undetected, locate 6 survivors in mountainous terrain, establish communications with ground forces, provide close air support against numerically superior enemy forces, coordinate extraction without getting shot down by surface-to-air missiles, and return home before fuel exhaustion made the decision for her. Simple on paper, potentially fatal in execution. 80 minutes out from the target area, her radar warning receiver detected the first hostile emissions. Enemy air defense systems, still distant but alert, scanning the sky for exactly the kind of intrusion she represented. Zara's hands moved across the electronic warfare controls with practiced efficiency, adjusting the aircraft's signature to minimize detection probability. The game of electronic hide-and-seek had begun, played at the speed of light with stakes measured in American lives. The mountains rose ahead like ancient guardians, their peaks shrouded in clouds that would provide concealment but also hide threats until the last possible second. Somewhere in those valleys, 6 Navy SEALs were fighting for their lives, calling out coordinates on emergency frequencies, hoping that someone, somewhere, gave enough of a damn to risk everything for strangers. They had no idea that their salvation was approaching at 1,200 miles per hour, piloted by a woman most of the military had tried to forget. Communication with the ground came through in fragments, encrypted bursts that painted a picture in blood and mathematics. "Ghost, this is Viper 6. The SEAL team leader's voice cut through static and distance, professional despite the desperation bleeding through every syllable. Grid 41 SUB 12,340 567,890, 6 souls, ammunition critical, enemy contact imminent. Request immediate close air support, danger close authorization approved." The coordinates placed them in a valley surrounded by 10,000-foot peaks, where enemy forces had established overlapping fields of fire and were systematically eliminating any possibility of ground-based rescue. Zara studied the topographical display on her multifunction screen, calculating approach angles and escape routes with the cold precision of a mathematician solving for variables that included death. The terrain was a tactical nightmare: narrow valleys that would channel her approach, high walls that would limit maneuvering options, and weather conditions that reduced visibility to less than 2 miles. Any pilot with common sense would request additional assets, air superiority, and a backup plan. But 6 Americans were dying, while common sense held committee meetings. Viper 6, Ghost, inbound your position. Time to target 8 minutes. Authenticate Bravo Charlie. She kept her voice level, professional, giving no hint of the adrenaline beginning to flood her system as the mountains rushed closer. The authentication protocol ensured she was talking to actual SEALs rather than enemy forces attempting to lure American aircraft into kill zones. Trust, in combat zones, was a luxury that got people killed. Ghost Bravo Charlie authenticated. We have eyes on approximately 50 enemy personnel, mix of infantry and technical vehicles. RPGs confirmed, possible shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. They've got us pinned down in a depression approximately 200 meters southwest of a burned-out village. Running low on ammunition, 2 wounded, 1 critical. Weather's closing in fast, visibility dropping, ceiling coming down. If you're coming, now would be good. The raw honesty in the SEAL's voice cut through military formality like a knife. These weren't statistics or tactical problems. They were human beings with families, dreams, and the kind of training that made them America's most elite warriors. But elite training meant nothing when you were outnumbered 8-1 in terrain that favored the enemy. What they needed was what Zara had always provided: controlled violence delivered with surgical precision. Viper 6, Ghost entering your area of operations. Marking my position with IR strobe, confirm visual. She dropped below the cloud ceiling, the F-22 suddenly visible to anyone with eyes but hopefully moving too fast for effective targeting. The valley opened before her like a wound in the earth, rocky walls streaked with snow, a landscape that had witnessed warfare for centuries and would witness it for centuries more. Below, muzzle flashes sparkled like deadly fireflies as the SEALs fought their last-stand battle. Zara could see the enemy positions now, infantry squads moving with coordinated precision, vehicles positioned to block potential escape routes, the textbook encirclement of a superior force eliminating an isolated enemy unit. It was beautiful in its tactical excellence and terrifying in its implications for the 6 Americans about to be overrun. The heads-up display painted targeting solutions across her field of vision, as the F-22's radar systems identified hostile vehicles and personnel concentrations. She had seconds to make decisions that would determine whether 6 families would receive folded flags or welcome home ceremonies. The aircraft's cannon held 480 rounds of 20mm ammunition, enough to change the tactical situation if deployed with the precision that had made her a legend, insufficient if she wasted shots on empty terrain or friendly forces. Ghost were taking heavy fire from the northeast ridge line, multiple muzzle flashes, estimate squad-sized element with crew-served weapons. The SEAL's voice was steady despite circumstances that would break lesser men. Second element approaching from the south, moving fast. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they close the distance. 5 minutes. Zara felt time compress into the narrow focus that every combat pilot recognized the moment when training, instinct, and pure will converged into action that would be analyzed later, but had to be executed now. The F-22 banked hard left, G-forces pressing her into the seat as she lined up on the enemy positions. Through her visor, she could see the muzzle flashes intensifying, a light show that meant death for the men counting on her to thread the needle between impossible and miraculous. The first strafing run came without warning, the F-22 dropping from the clouds like an avenging angel wrapped in titanium and malice. 20mm rounds stitched across the northeast ridge line at 6,000 rounds per minute, each shell designed to penetrate armor and destroy whatever lay behind it. The effect was immediate and devastating. Enemy fire from that position ceased instantly, replaced by secondary explosions as ammunition stores cooked off in brilliant orange flowers that bloomed and died against the mountainside. "Jesus Christ," came Viper 6's voice over the radio, reverence and relief mixing in equal measure. "Ghost, that was surgical. Enemy fire from the northeast has ceased, but we've got movement from the south. They're accelerating their approach, maybe trying to close distance before you can engage again." Zara pulled the F-22 into a climbing turn that would have crushed a civilian pilot. using the mountain terrain to mask her position while setting up for a second attack run. Through her peripheral vision, she caught sight of movement in the valley below, tiny figures scrambling for new positions, the enemy adapting to the sudden appearance of American air power with the kind of tactical flexibility that made them dangerous opponents. These weren't untrained militia. They moved with the coordination of professional soldiers who understood combined arms warfare. The radar warning receiver screamed to life as enemy air defense systems locked onto her position. Somewhere in those mountains, shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles were tracking her heat signature, waiting for the optimal firing solution. The F-22's countermeasures kicked in automatically, chaff and flare dispensers preparing to deploy, electronic jamming systems working to break enemy radar locks, but none of it guaranteed survival when flying low and slow in confined terrain. Viper 6 Ghost, be advised I'm taking SAM fire. Adjusting approach vector. She banked hard right as a missile streaked past her canopy, its proximity close enough to trigger every survival instinct evolution had programmed into human nervous systems. The projectile detonated against the far valley wall in a blast that reminded everyone involved that modern warfare was played for keeps, with no participation trophies for second place. The southern enemy element was advancing with mechanical precision, bounding from cover to cover in teams while maintaining suppressive fire. Zara could see their tactical competence in the way they moved, professional soldiers executing a plan they had drilled hundreds of times. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed American air power wouldn't arrive in time to change the equation. Now they were caught in the open, committed to an assault that had suddenly become a death sentence. Her second strafing run targeted the advancing infantry with the kind of precision that separated legends from footnotes in military history. The 20mm cannon spoke again, its voice echoing off valley walls as rounds found their targets with mechanical efficiency. Enemy soldiers dove for cover that no longer existed, their coordinated advance dissolving into survival instincts and confusion. The psychological effect was as important as the physical damage. Air power had a way of making even veteran troops feel small and vulnerable. "Ghost, you magnificent bastard!" The relief in Viper 6's voice was unmistakable. "Southern element is breaking contact. Repeat, Southern element is withdrawing. We've got breathing room, but not for long. They'll regroup and try again, probably with better air defense coordination." Zara climbed back to altitude, using the precious minutes to assess fuel status and ammunition remaining. The F-22's fuel gauges told an unforgiving story. She had enough gas for perhaps 2 more attack runs before mathematical reality forced her to choose between mission accomplishment and getting home alive. It was the kind of calculation that kept military chaplains busy and turned young officers' hair gray. But it was also the reality of combat aviation. Physics didn't negotiate. The enemy's next move came with the coordination of a chess grandmaster playing for blood. Air defense assets repositioned to create overlapping coverage zones, while infantry elements maneuvered to maintain pressure on the SEAL position. Someone down there understood American tactics well enough to know that the F-22 would have to return for additional strikes, and they were preparing a warm reception. "Ghost, this is Viper 6. We're observing enemy repositioning. Looks like they're setting up for coordinated air defense. Multiple heat signatures moving into positions that would give them overlapping fields of fire on your approach routes." The SEAL team leader's tactical assessment was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had accepted that death was a possibility, but wasn't ready to embrace it as an inevitability. Zara studied the valley through her targeting systems, noting the mathematical precision with which enemy forces were repositioning. They were good, better than the intelligence briefings had suggested. Professional soldiers who understood that destroying the American aircraft would leave the SEALs completely isolated and vulnerable to methodical elimination. The stakes had just escalated from rescue mission to aerial chess match, played at supersonic speeds with surface-to-air missiles as the opponent's pieces. Viper 6 Ghost. I need you to mark the most critical threat positions with infrared strobes. I'm going to try something that violates several laws of physics and probably a few regulations. Her voice carried the dry humor that had made her famous among pilots who understood that sometimes you laughed or you screamed, and screaming didn't help with aircraft control. The third attack run would be remembered in Air Force tactical manuals as either brilliant innovation or reckless desperation, depending on outcome and perspective. Zara brought the F-22 down through the valley at nearly ground level, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection until the last possible moment. At 400 feet above ground level, traveling at 600 miles per hour, she threaded the aircraft between mountain peaks with margins measured in feet rather than miles. The enemy saw her coming for perhaps 3 seconds before the 20mm cannon opened fire. At that speed, in that terrain, conventional wisdom said accurate gunnery was impossible. But Zara Thorne had built her reputation on proving conventional wisdom wrong. Her rounds found the repositioned air defense sites with lethal accuracy, eliminating the threat before it could respond effectively. Secondary explosions lit the valley floor, as ammunition and fuel stores added their own contributions to the destruction. "Holy shit, Ghost," Viper 6's voice cracked with emotion. "That was—" He paused, searching for words adequate to describe watching death arrive at supersonic speeds, precisely targeted and utterly decisive. "I've never seen anything like that. Enemy air defense positions are destroyed, repeat destroyed. We've got clear skis for extraction." But extraction remained the final puzzle piece in an equation written in fuel consumption and enemy reinforcement timelines. The nearest friendly forces were hours away, and Zara's fuel gauges showed dangerously low levels. She had perhaps 20 minutes of flight time remaining before the F-22 became an expensive glider, which meant 20 minutes to coordinate a rescue that typically required hours of planning and multiple aircraft working in coordination. That's when inspiration struck with the clarity of desperation. The burned-out village that Viper 6 had mentioned as a landmark. Intelligence photographs showed a section of road that might, with considerable optimism and perfect execution, serve as an improvised landing strip. It was shorter than any runway the F-22 was designed to use, surrounded by obstacles that would make approach and departure exercises in controlled demolition. But it was also the only option that didn't involve watching 6 Americans die while she flew home to face congressional inquiries. Viper 6 Ghost. I'm going to attempt a tactical landing on the road northwest of your position. Prepare for immediate extraction. This is not a drill, and we're not going to get a second chance. The words carried weight beyond their tactical meaning. She was committing the most advanced fighter aircraft in the American inventory to a landing that would either be studied in flight schools for decades or become a classified footnote in the files of operations that never officially happened. The approach required every skill she had accumulated through 15 years of military aviation. The F-22 descended through turbulent mountain air like a controlled catastrophe, its advanced flight control systems working overtime to maintain stability in conditions that would have killed lesser aircraft. At 200 feet, Zara could see the road's surface in detail. Cracked asphalt barely wide enough for the aircraft's landing gear, littered with debris that could destroy tires or puncture fuel tanks, surrounded by terrain that offered no forgiveness for navigation errors. Touchdown came with the controlled violence of barely contained disaster. The F-22's landing gear absorbed impact forces that stressed metal to its engineering limits, while thrust reversers and drag chutes fought to stop 60,000 pounds of aircraft in a distance meant for commercial trucks. Smoke poured from the brakes as physics and determination wrestled for control, the outcome uncertain until the very last moment when the aircraft finally rolled to a stop, engines winding down from emergency power to idle. 6 figures emerged from concealment and sprinted toward the aircraft with the desperate urgency of men who had accepted death and suddenly found redemption taxi up to their position. Even through her canopy, Zara could see they were professionals, weapons ready, moving with tactical coordination despite exhaustion and wounds. These were the Navy's finest, and they carried themselves like men who understood that salvation often came in unexpected packages. The largest of the SEALs, presumably Viper 6, approached the cockpit with his weapon at low ready. When he got close enough to see through her visor, his expression shifted from desperate relief to something approaching shock. Whatever he had expected American air power to look like, it apparently wasn't a woman who barely topped 5'6" and looked like she should be teaching elementary school rather than flying the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. "Ma'am," he said through the intercom as the canopy opened, his voice carrying decades of military professionalism despite circumstances that defied every assumption about how rescue operations were supposed to work. "I'm Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison. We've got 6 souls ready for extraction, 2 walking wounded, 1 urgent surgical." He paused, studying her face as if trying to reconcile legend with reality. "We're honored to have you here, but how exactly are we getting out?" "This bird's built for one." Zara was already unbuckling her harness, her mind racing through logistics that would have challenged a staff of military planners. "Chief, we're going to redefine the maximum occupancy requirements for Air Force fighters. It's going to be uncomfortable, probably dangerous, and definitely against regulations. But it's either that or we all walk home, and I don't think the local tourism board is particularly welcoming to American visitors." The solution she proposed violated so many safety protocols that it qualified as either innovative tactics or criminal negligence, depending on outcome. The F-22's cockpit could theoretically accommodate additional personnel if they were willing to ignore comfort, safety margins, and several laws of aerodynamics. It would mean flying an aircraft loaded beyond its design specifications, with weight distribution that would fundamentally alter flight characteristics, at altitudes and speeds that made survival dependent on perfect execution of a plan that had never been tested. Master Chief Morrison studied the aircraft's cockpit space with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent his career making impossible situations work through pure determination. "Ma'am, with respect, we're not small men. 6 operators plus gear, in a space designed for 1 pilot." He left the sentence hanging because they both understood the mathematical realities involved. But they also understood that mathematics meant nothing when the alternative was capture or death in a foreign country that would deny their existence while displaying their bodies on international television. "Chief, I've seen sardine cans with more room, but we're going to make this work." Zara's voice carried the confidence of someone who had built a career on proving that impossible was just another word for challenging. "Here's the plan. We strip down to essential gear only, redistribute weight for balance, and fly home at minimum speed to reduce stress on the airframe. It's going to be a memorable ride, but memorable beats dead every time." The loading process resembled a puzzle designed by someone with a sadistic sense of humor and a complete disregard for human comfort. 6 Navy SEALs, each carrying a lifetime of training and experience, somehow arranged themselves in a cockpit space that airline designers would have rejected as inhumane for a single passenger. Equipment was redistributed, secured, and triple-checked because loose gear in a high-performance aircraft could shift during maneuvering and create control problems that would kill everyone aboard. Morrison squeezed himself into the space behind Zara's ejection seat, his massive frame compressed into a space barely large enough for his torso. "Ma'am, I've been in some tight spots, but this takes the prize. How are we going to handle takeoff? This bird wasn't designed for this kind of loading." His voice carried professional concern mixed with the kind of gallows humor that kept special operations personnel sane during operations that civilian psychologists would classify as temporary insanity. "Chief, we're about to redefine the F-22's performance envelope in ways that Lockheed Martin never intended. Hold on to something solid. Don't touch any controls, and try not to lose your lunch when we hit military power. Zara's hands moved across the control surfaces with the unconscious precision of someone who could fly the aircraft by feel alone. Around her, 6 of America's most elite warriors prepared for a flight that would either enter military aviation legend or become a classified cautionary tale about the limitations of improvised solutions. The takeoff roll began with all the controlled violence of a barely contained explosion. The F-22's engines, designed to propel 43,000 pounds of aircraft and weapons, now struggled with nearly 50,000 pounds of aircraft, weapons, and human cargo distributed in ways that fundamentally altered the machine's center of gravity. The aircraft accelerated down the improvised runway like a reluctant rocket, gathering speed with agonizing slowness, while enemy forces in the surrounding mountains realized that their prize was about to escape. Small arms fire began impacting around the aircraft as enemy infantry attempted to disable the takeoff. Bullets sparked off the F-22's titanium skin, while Zara fought to maintain directional control with an aircraft that handled like a drunk elephant. At 150 miles per hour, she pulled back on the stick, coaxing the overloaded fighter into the air through pure determination and aerodynamic principles that were probably filing formal complaints with the laws of physics. The climb-out was a testament to engineering margins and pilot skill working in harmony to achieve the theoretically impossible. At 500 feet above ground level, with mountain peaks looming on all sides, the F-22 clawed its way skyward, carrying a load that would have grounded any sensible aircraft. But sensible aircraft didn't rescue Navy SEALs from impossible situations, and sensible pilots didn't volunteer for missions that existed in the gray area between heroism and court-martial proceedings. "Ghost, this is Viper 6. Morrison's voice came through the intercom, steady despite G-forces that were redistributing his internal organs in educational ways. "Whatever they're paying you, it's not enough. We've got visual on enemy forces in the valley. They're not happy about our departure." Through the canopy, muzzle flashes continued to sparkle against the mountainside like angry stars, enemy forces expressing their displeasure at watching their prize escape on wings of American engineering and pure audacity. Navigation home required constant recalculation, as the overloaded F-22 consumed fuel at rates that made budget officers weep and mission planners reconsider their career choices. Zara flew a profile that balanced fuel conservation with the need to clear mountain peaks that seemed to reach up like grasping fingers, each one a potential final resting place for 7 Americans who had pushed the boundaries of possible just a little too far. The aircraft systems worked overtime to compensate for loading conditions that existed far outside normal operational parameters. Flight control computers made thousands of micro-adjustments per second, keeping the unstable machine airborne through electronic wizardry, and the kind of engineering excellence that justified defense budgets that made civilian accountants question the sanity of military procurement. But even the most sophisticated systems had limits, and those limits were being tested with every mile of mountain terrain that passed beneath their wings. Communication with Edwards Air Force Base crackled through layers of atmospheric interference and encrypted radio protocols. "Ghost, this is Control. We have emergency crews standing by. Runway 4 cleared for immediate landing. Fuel status critical." The tower controller's voice carried the professional calm of someone who had handled aviation emergencies for decades, but there was an undertone of concern that spoke to the unusual nature of this particular situation. "Control, Ghost. Fuel status critical. Aircraft loaded beyond normal parameters. 7 souls aboard." Zara kept her voice level despite flying an aircraft that felt like it wanted to fall out of the sky through sheer overweight stubbornness. "Request emergency vehicles standing by and medical personnel for 2 wounded. This is going to be an interesting landing." The understatement of the century. delivered with the dry humor that had always been her trademark in situations where panic would be counterproductive. Behind her, she could feel the SEALs maintaining professional discipline despite circumstances that would challenge the composure of seasoned military personnel. Compressed into impossible spaces, dealing with G-forces and altitude changes that their training had never anticipated, they remained quiet and focused. These men had volunteered for missions that existed beyond the edge of reasonable risk assessment, and they understood that complaining about discomfort was counterproductive when survival depended on pilot concentration. The California coastline appeared through the haze like a promise of redemption, marking the transition from hostile territory to friendly airspace. But friendly airspace didn't solve the fundamental problem of landing an overloaded aircraft, with fuel gauges hovering dangerously close to empty. Zara began her descent toward Edwards with the careful attention of someone defusing a bomb while riding a roller coaster. Too much speed would stress the airframe beyond its limits. Too little speed would result in an uncontrolled descent that would make emergency landing procedures irrelevant. Edwards Tower, this is Ghost requesting immediate landing clearance. We are heavy, repeat heavy, fuel critical emergency descent. The radio call activated protocols that brought emergency vehicles racing across the tarmac and summoned personnel who specialized in aviation disasters. Fire trucks, ambulances, and crash recovery equipment positioned themselves along the runway like metallic guardian angels, ready to deal with whatever came next. The approach to Edwards Air Force Base became an exercise in controlled desperation, as Zara fought to maintain airspeed and descent rate within parameters that wouldn't kill everyone aboard. The F-22 handled like a pregnant elephant with vertigo, its flight characteristics fundamentally altered by weight distribution that would have made test pilots submit formal complaints to the laws of aerodynamics. Every control input required compensation for responses that were delayed, exaggerated, or completely contrary to normal flight behavior. Jesus, lady, you actually know how to fly this thing. The voice belonged to one of the SEALs compressed into the space near her left elbow, his tone carrying grudging respect mixed with the kind of amazement that came from watching someone perform at levels that redefined possible. These men had seen elite performance in every domain of military operations, but aviation at this level remained mysterious, almost magical in its complexity and precision. At 500 feet above the runway, Zara could see emergency personnel positioning themselves for whatever came next. The landing would require perfect timing, exact airspeed control, and the kind of precision that margin for error couldn't accommodate. Too fast and the aircraft would overshoot the runway into desert terrain that would turn them all into scattered debris. Too slow, and they would fall out of the sky short of the runway, with the same fatal result achieved through different physics. Touchdown came with bone-jarring impact, as the overloaded F-22 slammed onto the runway with enough force to stress every component to its engineering limits. The landing gear absorbed energy that would have crushed lesser aircraft, while thrust reversers and drag chutes fought to stop a machine that wanted to keep flying through the laws of momentum and mass. Smoke poured from the brakes as friction converted kinetic energy into heat and prayer, the outcome uncertain, until the aircraft finally rolled to a stop just short of the arresting barrier that marked the end of available runway. Emergency personnel swarmed the aircraft before,